This week, we are discussing the Delphi trial of Richard Allen. It's been 7 long years, and we finally got to hear the whole Guys Down the Hill video. We also learned what the crime scene was like, how they actually got to Richard Allen, what evidence was collected, and eyewitness descriptions. Do you think they have a strong case against Richard Allen? Tune in to find out our thoughts. We greatly appreciate the content creators who are traveling to the trial to cover what happens in court. The public would not know what is happening without you. Andrea Burkhart, the Defense Diaries, and the Murder Sheet were my sources. As always, everything we discuss is for entertainment and is speculation. Please like and subscribe, and definitely join our discussion in the comments. If you're ready, let's get into it. Welcome back to Typically Unique. I'm Kim Aponte, and I'm here with my husband, Carlos.
Hello. And we're going to continue our discussion on the Delphi murder case.
Oh, yes.
And, Richard Allen is the accused in this case. And we started when maybe there was just a couple of days of actual litigation going on, but now we've had a full week.
Oh, my goodness.
So information has been flowing in. A lot has settled on us, but I have to tell you, a lot really hasn't. It's surprisingly, at least where I sit, not a lot of detail, about is he guilty? Is he not guilty? I've been waiting for a lot of these big aha moments, and we have a couple.
Yeah.
But you're going to go through a lot of information. It's going to be like, okay, guy, not exciting. But we're going to do our due diligence. Kim's going to run through the majority of what we've learned throughout the week. We'll give our opinions on maybe some of the higher notable or the more notable items that happen in court. But otherwise, it just seemed pretty procedural, at least from where I sit. But how about your opinion? And maybe we'll jump right into it.
It took them a long time to actually get to even talking about Richard Allen.
Exactly.
So I do understand, because if you've been following this case, you've been waiting to hear what happened, what are the details. And this week we got it all. So lots of information. What actually happened? How did they get to him? What happened to the girls? All that came out this week. So
right. It seemed, at least from where I sit, and maybe we'll hear some things that maybe I didn't hear because there was so much information, but it seemed pretty procedural. Like, this is how they were murdered. This is how they were abducted, right? Because I think that's, a charge too. This is how, but the connection was hit and miss a little bit with Richard Allen.
Yeah.
And that's where I was like, that's why I was waiting for the big aha moment. Like, this cutting instrument, we can definitely put it to Richard Allen. There was little smoke and mirrors about what the cutting instrument could be and how it could be a Richard Allen tool, but it wasn't like, here it is and here's the,
right.
So it was a lot of procedural stuff, which to me is just laying the foundation still, which now 2 weeks in on a 1 month trial, then they say they were going to try to do this.
I think 4 to 6 weeks.
Oh, 4 to 6. Okay. So a month and a half. We've already done the first third.
Yeah.
And
or fourth. First quarter. First quarter over. It's not a slam dunk case. Mm-mm. The defense is definitely raising questions.
Yep.
And I have to say, this jury, because they're allowed to ask questions, which I've never seen that before. So it goes, the prosecution is presenting their case right now. So they're the lead. Then when they're done, the defense gets up and they do their cross-examination. And then the prosecution does a redirect. And then the jury can submit questions. They seem like a very intelligent jury, the way that they are asking questions. So that has been very interesting. All right. So this is Saturday through Thursday that we're going to talk about. And last Saturday was basically just how they found the girls. So they called witnesses who were there at the time when they found the girls. So they just basically described the area where they went, and there were people on both sides of the creek that found them at about the same time. So on one side, it was like law enforcement and someone from the fire department, I believe, and they seemed like they were higher elevated looking out and saw the bodies from that perspective. And then there were citizens volunteering more on the ground on the creek. But guess what? They all said the bodies looked like. What do we
Staged.
what do we always say? They're not mannequins.
Mannequins, yeah.
They all said, I thought it was, they looked like mannequins. And if you listen to a lot of true crime, that's people will often say that.
Yeah. And we have a saying in our household, it's never a mannequin and it's never fireworks.
Yeah, never
It's
fireworks.
always a dead body and it's always gunshots.
Right. So that was it from Saturday, and that they were found at 12:15
Yeah.
on February 14th. So they went missing on February 13th, found 12:15 on February 14th. Okay, then Monday was more.
Wait a second. Let's stop there.
Mhm.
Let's stop there for a second because I didn't hear maybe the exact time that they were found, but I remember you were stating, and a lot of the community was stating, how could they have not have found them that night? From where they were at the night of the murders, when people first started coming in.
Yep.
How could they have not have found him that night? Now, from what I understand, at daybreak the next day, the search was back on. Why did it take them over 6 hours to find them, or 4 hours to find them?
Yeah. I have watched videos of the area because it was very hard for me based on just hearing verbal descriptions of the end of the bridge and down by the creek. I just couldn't get my bearings because it kept saying south and north. But I did find a video that once you see it, I was like, oh, okay. So they were like way past, down, the end of the bridge down, and then way off to the left across the creek in a very secluded area.
But I think our last podcast that we did on this, I think you had mentioned that you and the community was pretty like, what's going on? How could they have not have found them that night of the abduction and ultimate murder? How could they have not found them? And maybe it'll play into a little bit more of what I think was alluded to later on in the week. But it's still surprising that with at least 4 hours of daylight, say it didn't even turn daylight until 8 a.m. Why did it take 4 hours and 15 minutes to find them?
So, well, yeah, in the daylight. Yeah, that's a good question.
That's a great observation.
I know that night. Yeah, good job, babe. I know that night they're thinking, and probably even starting in the morning, nobody wanted to think the worst. So they weren't thinking anything nefarious. So they're thinking they fell off the bridge, they're injured somewhere, something like that, and so they were mostly focusing along the creek or below the bridge, and they were kind of more off in a more secluded area.
Okay,
So to me, that explains at least the nighttime. Now the next day also is when the police really took over. The night of was more like everybody was just out there free for all searching, but the next day was more of a coordinated. You had to check in, you were assigned an area. It was more of a grid search. So you would think maybe 4 hours to do that whole area. I mean, it is a huge
it just seemed
park.
like you and the community, and I'm not belaboring the point because I'm saying you were wrong, but it just seemed like the location of the bodies, where they said that they were found, in comparison to where the bridge ended, that literally, how could nobody that night who knew that they were probably at the end of the bridge because of the Snapchat video not have found them that night. But then again, the next day, it still took 4 hours and 15 minutes to find them.
Well, that's why a lot of people think that they were taken somewhere that night and they weren't there. Like I was definitely on that path, but I I'm not 100%
Yeah.
off of that, but the testimony of the witnesses and all of the law enforcement is,
That's what I was
it's
alluding to earlier.
makes it
Yeah.
questionable.
Yeah. That's what I was alluding to. So,
Yep.
okay. We'll get to
Yeah.
that a little bit later on. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to derail on the first
No, that's
action
okay.
point.
So Monday was seeing the girls and what happened to them and hearing that the reaction of everybody in that courtroom, seeing the crime scene photos and what the girls actually looked like and how they were found and the crime scene area, just devastating.
Yeah.
Just I can't, and knowing that their family members are in there, oh my goodness. So they had a patrol officer and a crime scene investigator testify about that. um there was supposedly, so there was lots of blood at the scene, and Libby um had a lot of blood on her, and Abby seemed to be, everybody kept describing her clean.
Mhm.
So very distinct difference between the two girls. um then that's when they got into the suspicious position, and I guess the girls were laying on the ground in a V formation, like I think their feet were closer and then spread out towards their heads. They went into all the detail, how, where were their arms and how were their bodies positioned, what their injuries looked
So let's
like.
freelance that a little bit. Okay.
Mhm.
So, we heard posed, right? So we don't have to
Mhm.
describe every limb,
Right.
literal or figurative.
Mhm.
But there was something like they were posed in some type of position.
Yep.
There was also some thought of this could be some type of cult by the way that the branches or limbs were on top of them.
Yeah. So the defense will always say that the branches were placed. The prosecution is claiming they were trying to cover them, but they were so sporadic and so few of them. The defense at one point said, well, they did a horrible job trying to cover them because there weren't very many branches. And then the prosecution came back and said, or whoever the witness was from law enforcement said, well, they weren't found. So, it was kind of a smart aleck comeback,
Yeah.
but
So the girls were somewhat posed.
mhm,
Looks like they were placed, it wasn't just that's how they landed at the time that they were deceased. Looks
yes,
like they were put in that position, limbs put on there. There was even some statements of, limbs on top of one of the girls' heads to look like horns. So they were trying to make a story fit. And I happened to be looking at this picture, um, sketch
a sketch.
depiction,
Mhm.
not the actual picture, but of what those branches look like and how they, and I remember asking you to come and take a look at it because they had the branches in red and then the bodies in black. So, and I said, doesn't that look like Asian writing in some way? And I would like for a person who, and you're like, I don't see it, but there was like if they were trying to spell something because it almost looks like TV on one of them, the letter T and the letter V, the way they had the branches, like, okay, that's not really anything. I don't think that's anything. But just the way that the branches look, these red branches over these black shaded bodies, it almost looked like Asian writing. And I wish somebody who was familiar with that be like, what is that symbol closest to, and I don't know what they call it. I keep wanting to say hieroglyphics, but it's not
No, it's Chinese
hieroglyphics.
writing is
Chinese
what you're
writing,
talking
yeah.
about, but I think it's more symbols,
Symbols.
and a lot of people are calling them runes, from either a cult like
Right.
symbol. There's also, witchcraft and, those
Yeah.
types of.
So I guess my point is, I think, is there some credence to some of the, for lack of a better term, conspiracy theory about this was a cult thing and not just one crazed killer?
Well, because they're oddly placed. It's not like, oh, someone just picked up a huge thing of leaves and sticks and threw them on top to just, to cover them up. It is a branch across the chest. And they described one on one of the girls looking like an asterisk. Very specific placement of the branches. So
So
that's why.
if there was some cult out there, there would be some cultists to say, "Oh yeah, we do that all the time to the chickens that
Well,
we."
they're not going to come out and say that.
You don't think there's no cultist that has ever reformed and been like, "Hey, FBI
Oh,
police officers, this is what we used to do in this cultist organization."
well, they have.
Okay.
Then you can look up those symbols and find out what the meanings are. I
There we
mean,
go.
there's you can do that.
Okay.
Like, you can Google it.
There you go. So there, my statement wasn't that
It
crazy.
is a thing.
Okay.
But this day was very hard and heavy on everybody
For
that
sure.
was there. And so they talked a lot about the whole scene, the sticks. They mentioned other evidence that was collected at that time. So at the scene, there was a Jimmy John's cup and a straw that was taken, some cigarette butts, a bra, a sock, and an energy drink can. I do not know if any of those were tested for DNA. There was no DNA connected to Richard Allen. I know that. No DNA at the scene was connected to Richard Allen.
Yeah.
They mentioned finding the bullet. So there was a bullet casing found between the girls. They're going to spend a whole day on that coming up. There's a big debate or a lot of questioning about the sticks because law enforcement left them at the scene. They just took them off the bodies, threw them in a pile, and left them out there for like 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And everybody that were witnesses that testified said, well, you can't get DNA off of bark. It's not good for collecting DNA, but everybody who's covered this case said, well, there could have been fibers, there could have been hair, there could have been something else attached to those sticks, but now you've left them out in the elements for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things are, when you're trying to say Richard Allen is the guy and can you find evidence of anybody else? Well, you don't have. These are the types of things where if you could have tested that,
Right.
maybe
Right.
you would see
And the
that.
Coke can and the straw. And
Yeah.
we talked, I don't know if it was the last episode or maybe one from Brian Koberger, but your point is test everything.
Yep.
If there's 1,000 pieces of evidence, shut down a lab for
That's
2
right.
months,
Yep.
take 1,000 pieces in there, do no other cases, and test absolutely 1,000.
Because you want to be sure you want justice for the families, you want justice for the victims, and you want to get the right person.
And you do one trial a year. And never get justice for anybody else.
Or you hire more people.
We are Richard Allen backed up for the next 5 years in this lab.
Hire more people and do it right. That's my philosophy.
That's right.
So this is going to be mentioned several times by many different witnesses. They did not conclude a time of death, and they did not take body temperature.
So to this point, again, a lot of factual, stuff from the scene. This is what we saw. It's not who did it, but this is what we saw when we got there.
Yes.
This is, the way it looks.
Not about who yet.
Not about who. So to me, all this is good information because a lot of this stuff was sealed and we had to speculate. So now we know Kim's reading it off, but there's really no dialogue around it because there's nothing. It's just laying the foundation of what it looked like.
Mhm.
So continue to tell our audience what it looked like. 'Cause it's nothing
Well,
really.
the only other thing on this day, bullet points. Here's an example of the jury questions that I thought were very good. So I told you that the bullet casing was found. So they asked, could the bullet be the bullet that they have in evidence be different from the one that they found at the scene?
Mhm.
That was very telling. Why would they ask that? They're thinking, they were questioning like chain of custody and things like that. Um, just it's telling with where they're when you hear these questions from the jury, you're kind of speculating like where's their mind at? Like where are they thinking? Um, and they also ask, can you assure evidence wasn't tampered with? So they must have heard some things that made them question that. And that was Monday. Good.
Good. Nothing for that.
So Tuesday was all about the audio and video from Libby's phone.
Mm.
So the guys down the hill video, which everybody has been waiting to see the whole thing. So we only got a few seconds of it this whole time. And I think there's a total of like 43 seconds or something like that. So they had a crime scene investigator. He was the witness, and the people who were in the courtroom described seeing the video. So what you could see was it shows the end of the bridge, and then you see Abby on the bridge, and then the phone. This is the raw video with nothing done to it. The phone turns upside down. Abby looks like she's running or moving quickly towards Abby is running quickly towards Libby, who's taking the video. And Libby's already at the end, so Abby's coming towards her to the end of the bridge. Then you see Bridge Guy, and it was described as the video was taken in portrait, so it's not widescreen, it's very narrow, and the Bridge Guy was like a tiny part of the image. And so that's what you see. Then they talk about the audio. Do you want to say anything yet
After you
about the
read the
video?
audio. Yep.
So now this is the original. They're going to bring this up many times on many days. So at this point, the person testifying is just saying that, or I guess they played this. They must have played this in court. Because remember, I'm only listening to people who are there and they're giving their account. So they played this in court. So everybody sitting in court is hearing what they hear. And I guess they played it a couple times. And the first time they said it was like super hard to hear anything. The second time they said it sounded like Libby's making comments, something like the trail ends here. Then one of the girls says something about a gun. They could just hear the word gun. And then Abby sounds like she's like got a frightened tone of her voice and nervous. And then you hear Bridge Guy say, guys, and then he pauses, and then they say, you hear a metallic noise, and then he says, down the hill. And then they thought they heard Abby say, huh, and then they start moving, and the video ends. So that was the original one. I know we know more about that.
Yeah.
Do you
I'll wait.
want
No,
to?
yeah, I'll wait till we get to the other part.
Okay.
Yeah.
The metallic noise they'll say is like a gun. What do they call it?
Cocking the gun.
Yeah, like cocking the gun. They
yeah.
called it something else, but that's how we say it.
Cycling the
Us
gun.
non.
Yeah.
And they brought on some witnesses who were there that day and saw Bridge Guy. So there's 3 girls who are on the trail. They go out to the trail all the time because their house is close to it. They were out there that day. They took photos by this bench. They saw a guy walk by. They gave his height and description. They described him as like 5'10", muscular build, all dark clothing. There was another witness that was a walker, and she went out there all the time. She had her little route, and she would do 3 laps. And on this day, she did 2 laps. She had to use the restroom. So she went to her car. She drove into town to the library. Then she came back, finished her 3rd lap. And when she was doing her 3rd lap, she saw Bridge Guy on the bridge on the first platform. And she described him as younger. I don't know if she used the word good looking, but attractive. I don't know, some kind of word. And fluffy hair.
Mhm.
Um, and they can verify a lot with her because she had her Fitbit on, so they can, they got the data from that. So then there was supposedly a dramatic moment because this walker, um, she is the one who gave a sketch, and the defense did not want the sketches brought into court. And when she was getting examined by the prosecution, she said something about the sketch. So now it's out there. Like, well, you had me draw a sketch. You had me use a sketch. She's the one who they drew the younger looking sketch, which actually came out second. The first sketch that came out was the kind of chunkier faced guy with remember the hat? We were saying what kind of a hat it was. And her sketch was a younger looking guy. So they didn't put hers out first. But now that's out there in court. So I don't know if they're going to I think she's going to get called back later because now the defense is going to want to probably clear that up. So the jury asked the question if you could mistaken a hat for the curly hair.
Hat for the curl. Well, we did have a long discussion, like you mentioned, about that because the one sketch shows a curly haired person, the other one shows them with a Kango, correct?
Yeah, and hardly any hair.
Yeah, we can't see the hair because of the hat.
Yeah, hat.
So we were looking at the bridge guy's image, right? Because one of the witnesses said they thought it was a stocking cap without a brim. So could you confuse curly hair for a regular stocking cap? Did the person have curly hair, or were they wearing a Kango? And when I looked at the bridge guy's photo at first, when I first looked at it, I thought it was a stocking cap. I didn't think it was curly hair, but it didn't look like a Kango until I made the picture a little bit bigger and you could see the short brim on the thing. So my assumption is, and we got into a big debate about this yesterday, which composite went out first. You would think they would put out the composite of bridge guy because that's the guy they're looking for, not some eyewitness, because eyewitness testimony convicted a lot of innocent people.
Yeah.
So
we're going to see.
We're going to go with the evidence that doesn't lie, which is digital evidence. And that's what they took to their best ability. That's what they took to try to make the sketch. And they clearly sketched the Kango hat, which I could kind of see a little bit better in that little bit of still frame and then that little piece when he was walking. But at first glance, to me, it looked like a stocking cap. And you said the exact opposite. I immediately knew it was a Kango, and I would have never confused it with a stocking cap or curly hair.
Correct.
Okay, so on digital evidence that does not lie, we interpreted it completely different.
And you're talking about, so the sketch that they released was based off of the video, which makes sense because they had the video from day one. Like they had their phone.
Why have some woman who had to go pee, try to, try to give a description when I got, I could just draw the sketch off of this. Makes no sense.
But then they ended up releasing hers, and maybe because so many years had gone by and their leads dried up and they weren't sure, but they did end up releasing it.
Well, I heard somebody say, and I don't know if we're there yet, but whoever's talking, I heard a policeman say, don't assume that whoever's talking on that video is Richard Allen. There could have been somebody else.
Yeah,
Have you heard that?
so I know the defense asked one of the witnesses, when you hear the voice say down the hill or whatever, you can't see actually who it's coming from.
Right.
You cannot see that it's his mouth,
Right.
the guy on the video. So he asked, could it have been someone else off camera? And this one instance of the person they asked said, well, that's a far stretch, like, because
Okay.
they want to believe that it's,
Yeah.
the guy on the
Okay.
video.
So maybe when they were in that 7-year or 5-year hiatus of I don't know what's going on, yeah,
Yes.
maybe they're grasping at straws with some eyewitness testimony, someone who already did 2 laps, a little bit exhausted, got to go to the restroom. Oh, wait a minute, I see this guy, okay. Right. If I figure you're gonna bring it up, I'm gonna enhance it.
I guess I got reprimanded for saying that she went into town to use the restroom, and you've said it 5 times.
Well,
I only said it once.
I figured, well, we're gonna bring it in there. Let's talk about if she, when you have to go pee, it clouds your judgment.
Oh my God. So one reason this was so fascinating to me to listen to this trial is because, like you were just saying, 2017, yeah, 5 years went by
Mhm.
before they had a suspect. So what was happening during all that 5 years? Why did it take 5 years? And that all gets cleared up during this trial. So on Wednesday, they have more witnesses that were there on the trail that day. And this woman, her name was Sarah, and she was just driving by. She normally would walk her dogs on the trail, but her dogs weren't friendly. And this is, I don't know if it's important, but this just kind of paints the picture why she was there, because she would kind of scope it out, like, how busy is the park? Can I take my dog today? So she was driving by, maybe at a slower pace than she would have, because she's kind of checking it out. And she's the one who sees a man walking down the road. To me it sounded like he was on the same side of the road as her, because she said she was only, like, I don't know, 3 feet away or something from him. And she said he was muddy and bloody. Then when the defense got a hold of her, they, like, went at her because she was interviewed a couple times. The first time she was interviewed, and I'm assuming it was recorded, but definitely the transcripts, they only recorded the words muddy. That's it. And then I don't know how many years later she was interviewed again, and then it was bloody. So, people get clouded, or what's the word? Manipulated or something like that, where, because the picture's been out, the photo's been out, the name is out, or they know what happened now. So she goes from muddy to bloody.
And I think what I heard in that was the big contentious was there were 2 things. One, she was 20 feet away or she was 3 feet away. So that was a big contention. Was he just muddy or muddy and bloody? She says that, hey, I said bloody, 5 years ago. You just didn't write it down.
Yes.
So I really didn't change. So yeah, again, this is eyewitness testimony that for me is hard to put, again, bushy eyebrows. Are we going to convict on bushy eyebrows?
Reference to Idaho 4.
Yeah. Muddy and bloody, or muddy, okay. So that muddy tracks, muddy and bloody could convict, but I don't lend it. I think it's a piece, but it has to be the smallest piece of the puzzle.
Well, the interesting thing about her is she was the one witness out of the eyewitnesses, just the citizens who were there. She got very defensive and was like, kind of, I don't know if she was yelling, but she got snarky back with them. Like, she did not like the way they were questioning her. And because they were like, how could you tell it was blood from, your vehicle's moving, you're passing by, you're only seeing him for a few minutes. And she went into his jeans were whitewashed and it was bright red and I could clearly see. So
Yeah.
that's what she had to say. So then they had a doctor, uh Core was his last name, and I think he was a forensics guy, maybe the medical examiner. And everybody complained he was hard to hear, but he went into depth about the wounds. He was
Yeah.
describing,
Again, more
but
foundational.
this was
Yeah.
important because he really seemed like he did due diligence in trying to figure out the weapon. He first thought it was like a serrated type weapon, and then he's the one that came to the conclusion that it was a box cutter. And what was important about it being a box cutter was that the wounds had, and this is a little graphic, I'm sorry for that, but something that they could tell was butting up against the bodies. And so, you know how there's a hand, like that type of, it's like that hand
Yeah,
guard or
yeah.
whatever on there. Also, he mentioned there was a handkerchief found in the creek. And that was kind of, I'm like, well, was that tested? Like, who did that belong to? He also made note that it wasn't a residue, but he could tell that there was something. There was a line on one of the girls' faces that it appeared like it would have been like a duct tape edge line. But it was not like a sticky residue, but it was definitely something. So, when there's that theory out there that they were taken somewhere and then brought back, if that was a gag or something like that, that would fit that.
I think someone else had mentioned it was some type of potential restraint.
Yeah. And then he was asked about the time of death, and I could not believe this was the answer that he gave. I want the science, and I don't know how many cases we have covered where I'm like, these coroners and medical examiners just aren't delivering what I think they should be able to deliver. But he said the time of death was sometime after they were seen and prior to them being discovered. Like, duh, I could have said that. Like, and they did not take the temperature of the body. There was a whole big discussion. He got cross-examined about that. He said he couldn't take the temperatures of the body because he didn't want to interfere with the SA kit that they would do for that testing. I mean, so he had a reason,
Makes
but
sense.
I think there's other ways to tell, though.
Yeah, there is other ways, and there's if an autopsy was if an autopsy was performed, did they eat anything that morning?
Right.
If they didn't, that would then it'd be very difficult to do time of death. But temperature would have been one. The elements would change that a little bit, especially them being there overnight.
There were a lot of questions about that,
so,
with scavengers,
yeah,
insects, all that kind of stuff. So, but the evidence, the answers did not tell anything.
Right.
Then they got into the phone that day. So Wednesday was these witnesses, the medical examiner, and the phone. And so this phone expert was all about, was the phone moving? When was it last moving? So in a nutshell, the phone was moving from 2:08 p.m. to 2:18 p.m., then from 2:25 p.m. to 2:32 p.m. At 2:31 it changed elevation. So that completely matches up with the girls walking out to the bridge, being on the bridge, and having to walk down the hill. At 2:32 is the last movement of the phone. So that seems pretty evident right there.
At least for the abduction part, right?
Yes.
The time of abduction.
Yes.
We don't know time of death, but we know probably down to a minute the time of abduction.
Yes, because the defense is going to claim that the girls were taken down the hill to get into a vehicle and leave, and the prosecution is saying they went down the hill and were
deceased.
Yeah. Right after, like immediately. There's a lot of information out about the phone information and what the police did with the phone. There were I know there was one crucial picture that was lost. They kept doing extractions on the phone, and they were just explaining every time you do an extraction, you're using up this is me in layman's term, using up the memory, and then your phone it's going to delete information um every time you do that. So every time they would do that, they're taking stuff off the phone. And they did this extraction quite a few times.
So the phone, because there's going to be a very important the phone later on
coming up right now.
Yeah. So the phone we're talking about right now is
Libby's
phone.
Libby's phone. Yes. So with Richard Allen's phone,
There we go. Yeah.
Looking at Libby's phone, they said there was no connection to Richard Allen, but then we found out they're going to go to Richard Allen's house at some point. We're going to find out how they get to Richard Allen, but on this day they just mentioned that he had 23 devices, and the phone that he had in 2017 was not among those 23 devices that they collected.
Let me say that a different way. So, but let's start with Libby's phone.
Okay.
So you had mentioned that there was no connection to Richard Allen from Libby's phone.
Yeah.
Okay. So they weren't talking on social media without aliases, direct connect. None of that was found on Libby's phone.
Right.
Also, Libby's phone was found between the two girls at the time their bodies were discovered.
Libby's phone it was under her body. She was on top of on the phone.
So that phone is there. Now you've gone over to Richard Allen's phone and you mentioned 23 devices. Richard Allen had his cell phones from every year from 2005 to 2024, except for that year, 2017.
Yep.
Except for the 2017 phone, he did not have that one. But when he was first interviewed, they had took down the number, not the phone number, but the serial number of that phone in that interview. So they know when they exercise that search, all other phones were available except for that phone was no longer
That's
available.
The only reason they knew that it was missing, that thankfully that officer
Officer Dullen.
Yeah, he testifies. The jury asked a question about that too. They said, how did you determine there was no connection to the girl? So they really, really wanted to know that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Thursday was all about how they got to Richard Allen. So I wanted to know this also.
Yeah.
Big question. So there was a woman who worked for 40 years, her whole career. She worked in the welfare office, children's services. She retired. She still wanted to do something for her community. So this crime had happened. So she volunteered at the police department to organize files. And I think that's a great thing. But I'm also a little concerned that they put a normal citizen in charge of. They described her as being a receptionist who took tips, and that she was also going through the files and kind of sorting them.
She was going to digitize them. She's going to take all the
Okay. So I heard she was just filing them into different. What did you hear?
She was going to digitize them.
No, I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
Okay. So she's going through these files and she's kind of double checking where she, is it just a tip that was called in? Is it a tip that's a narrative? They described it as hey, my uncle looks like bridge guy, and then if a officer goes out and talks to the uncle and then writes a report, she's kind of matching the tip to the report, putting them together, putting them in a file. So she's doing that, and Richard Allen self-reported either the day after or whatever, very close to after the murders, that he was actually there. He was at the scene. So they have that as a tip. Um, she found that. Wait a minute. How did
And
this
felt
go?
like it was mislabeled in some way because his last name was labeled as Whitehead or something. And she thought that that was odd, that maybe this tip wasn't in the right spot. It probably didn't have the high um attention to it, urgency to it. So she brought it to somebody like, look, this is kind of the wrong name, seems very important. You know, I'm not sure if this got filed correctly or followed up correctly, I think was what was going on there from what I gathered.
Yes. So what happened was back in 2017, so it was 2 or 3 days after the murders, Dan Doolin, the
Yep.
police officer we were talking about, he interviewed Richard Allen.
Yes.
So Richard Allen says, "Hey, I was there." He's assigned to go out and interview these people. So when he wants to talk to Richard Allen didn't want to go to the police station. He didn't want them coming to his house. So he said, "Hey, let's meet at a grocery store parking lot." So that's kind of weird. So they meet at a grocery store parking lot. He said, "I was at the park from 1 to 3." And then later, before he leaves, he says, "No, it was 1:30 to 3:30." He says he saw those 3 girls that were taking the pictures out on the trail that gave a description of Bridge Guy. He saw them back. He's like, "Yeah, I saw them too." Um, and he said, "I parked at the CPS building." And the prosecution is claiming that Bridge Guy's car is parked at the CPS building. Like that's where they think the person parked. Um, this is the officer who got his phone identification. And so that's how they ended up knowing that it was missing. So that report was done in 2017. This Shank lady is going through, sees that error. And I think she's also like thinking, did anybody follow up on this? Like there was a tip, there was an interview, where does this go? And so she reaches out to another officer and says, "Hey, I came across this name." And she tells him about it. And so that's how he gets brought back up again.
Mhm.
And so they're like, "Oh, let's go follow up. Let's go follow up on this guy again."
Yeah.
The one police officer he was in charge of the wildlife, because it's Indiana, there's a lot of hunting, fishing, stuff like that. He was in charge of all those outdoor licenses and stuff like that. So he just goes on his computer and looks up Richard Allen's name and finds out that Richard Allen and his wife had applied for fishing licenses. So he's like, okay, they're in the system. But then he notices that a few days or time after the murders, Richard Allen went into the computer and changed his height and his weight. Would you ever change your height? Like I mentioned that before, your height doesn't change.
Yeah.
So he made his height go from 5'4" to 5'6", and then he added like 15 extra pounds. So that's suspicious. Like there's I went into this gung ho on the whole conspiracy theory, but I don't know. I'm waiting to see everything at this point. My question was initially, if Richard Allen self-reported himself there, like it doesn't seem like that many people that we've heard of. I mean, they've had 4 eyewitnesses come forward. He could have been a 5th. It's not like doesn't seem like there were hundreds. So if they know Richard Allen was there, why not at least talk to him more as a witness,
And
even not as a suspect?
And I think that's what the lady is saying, right? Who found this information and I think was concerned that it wasn't filed correctly. Like
Yes.
the last name or something was off. So it got misfiled, looks like 5 years ago. And she's bringing it to someone's attention that this seems bigger than where it's at. It looks like it's mislabeled in some ways. We need to percolate this back up. And it sounds she did an amazing job. I mean,
Yeah.
that could have just been okay. I'm filing these or digitizing them or whatever. Let me just do my job and go on with it. But I think she found something, and if you see something, say something, and she saw something and said something.
Yep. So that's how they're getting on to Richard Allen.
Yeah.
So they have video from a store and a car that was parked. So they want to find out about his car. So they find out he works at the CVS. One of the police officers goes to the CVS. They find his car. They take a picture, and they're focused on the rims of the car because I guess they had spokes. And so that's how they're matching up. Oh, his car definitely looks like the make and model. And it has this special feature of these special rims that's just like the car that was backed in at the CPS building, because that was a whole discussion about, oh, the car was backed in. Nobody ever backs in their car.
Yeah, and what does that mean in layman's terms is that the camera could not see the license plate. Right?
Yeah, trying to hide the license plate. Right. Yes. Yes. So it's now 2022, and they interview him again. And they ask him, what's your story? And he said his wife was working that day. He was off. He went to another town called Peru, Indiana to visit his mom. Then he left there. He went home, changed and got his jacket, and then went to the trails, to the bridge, to the platform. I am curious to know what he said he did after, but I have not heard that anywhere yet. They showed him the picture of the bridge guy, and his response was, if that is a photo that the girls took, it can't be me. What do you think about that response? If someone said, hey, is this you? What would you say? No. Yeah. I wouldn't say, well, if the victims took it, it's not me. No. I wouldn't say it like that, but that was weird. The defense at this point, they're making a big point about the route he took to the park, because again, just like with Brian Koberger's case in Idaho 4, it's going to be, is he caught on camera? Not caught on camera. They're going to try to prove that that's not his car and he didn't drive that way.
Let me stop you there, because I think in this case it doesn't matter, because you said, I don't know, 20 minutes ago, he puts himself in the park at the time of the murder.
Yeah, but the question is the car.
The route, the car, none of that is going to make a bit of difference.
Well, if you're trying to prove if it's your car or not.
Yeah, but the route, the car ain't going to make a bit of difference if he puts himself there at the time of the murder.
True.
You could have walked, you could have flown in, carrier pigeon, doesn't matter. I was there in the park at the time of the murder.
True.
He puts himself there. So he doesn't matter how he got in and how he got out. He was in the park at the time of the murder. Koberger was in the house at the time of the murder, right? You don't care what's on video at a gas station a mile away, right? If he puts himself in the house at the time of the murder, you don't need all that other stuff.
Yeah, but there's more evidence to it, and they're saying the car is also part of it, and it's just another piece.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully to get forensics,
that's not
but
his
7
car.
years later, 5 years later, they ain't getting anything out of there.
Yep. So another police officer testifies, basically just backs up everything that was already said with Richard Allen. So once they talk to him, now they're like very suspicious. So they get a warrant and they go to his house, and he's sitting in his car. His wife leaves to go to her work for a few minutes while they're searching the house.
They have to go to the restroom or something?
I was not going to say that again. She did.
Okay.
She did. So she went to work. I cannot believe what they pulled out of this guy's house. They had a jacket just like the one that's described,
Yeah.
like a Carhartt type, whatever, dark blue jacket, boots. The amount of knives that he had in his bedroom seemed like, I'm like, why would you have those in your bedroom? He had a gun that they're gonna claim matches the bullet in a like hope chest. Some other weapons. I said boots. They took a family album where they had pictures of the family at the park near the bridge. Um, I think those were the major things that they took
But the
from his
major thing
house.
that happened when the wife went to go to the restroom is
They said to him, because he was asking about his wife, is she detained? They said no, told him where she went, and they said, we can take you there if you want to go see her. And he kept saying, it doesn't matter. It's all over anyways, or something like that. It
Right.
doesn't matter. Yeah, it's over.
Yeah.
Which seems pretty damning.
And then later on, they said, hey, if anything gets broken during our search, if we ruin anything, we're going to reimburse you. And he says, it doesn't matter.
Yep, it's over.
Yeah, it's over.
anyways.
So people are calling that
Or
a
it's done now, or something like
people
that.
are calling that a confession, or maybe it's just an admission like, look, you guys are going to find stuff here. And, and you guys finally put it 2 and 2 together after 5 years. So it's all over now. So, so be it.
Yes. I do know that they interviewed him about that later because they did not arrest him right away. And they had him in again for questioning. Him and his wife thought they were going to go. I guess they took the car, which there was no DNA evidence in the car. So for some guy who's muddy and bloody walking back to his car, there wasn't anything in the house except for this weapon that they're claiming was the one that cycled the bullet casing through it. And there's going to be a whole day on that. But he went in to talk to them, and he seemed like he was pretty adamant this time. Like, I didn't do this. I'm not going to say I did something I didn't do. Seemed to answer all their questions. That part was described to me like he was claiming his innocence and sticking to it.
So now we're finally mentioned Richard Allen.
It took them like 6 days to even get to him.
Which we talked about earlier in this episode, that, a third or a quarter of the trial's been gone before we even made any type of connection like this, But so it's good to get to this. And I think we're getting to the meat and potatoes of the trial. Hopefully now be interested to see what happens when the defense could say, these guys didn't prove anything. I got nothing. I'm not calling anybody, and there could be no defense, which means the prosecution can't come back and, say more stuff because they're like, look, you
didn't prove anything.
Yeah. So prosecution has to be very careful about what they do from this point forward. Make some clear connections, because it was only the last day that they finally pulled all this together. But I want to go to something, I guess, a little bit more heartbreaking. I don't know if you have it here, but and it may happen late on Friday or maybe Saturday, where they released the actual transcript of that.
Oh yes, I do have that. I did have that somewhere.
And I think at the very, the girls were talking amongst themselves. They did release a transcript of what they thought the girls said before Bridge guy came up to them, and they were noticing like, oh boy, this doesn't look good, and that he got a gun, or he be a gun or something. But when they were finally confronted and he says, guys, one of the girls says hi.
Yeah, I do have it all written.
Do you? Yeah, read that. And it's heartbreaking, because there's still that innocence, and then you realize the terror or the monster that is there in front of them.
Yeah. So this was the officer. He said he listened to this thing 100 times to figure out what he thinks was being said. So first is he right here? Don't leave me up here. See, this is the path. That be a gun. and then a whisper, like they whispered it, that'd be a gun. No path here. We have to go down here. And then that's when you hear the guy say, guys, and the girls say, hi back. And then there's a gun racked. That's what they called it,
Right.
like a racking of a gun sound, and then down the hill.
Ugh.
And that's it. Just horrible, horrible. And then it just ends.
So it looks like they were looking for a way out. And at the end of that bridge, there was no path. And, I did watch some videos of people who went out there afterwards, and they said they slate rocks and it's straight down. It's not, it's probably 10 feet. It's not egregiously straight down. There is slate rock there. It would be very troublesome, to traverse that
Very
in some way,
steep, yeah.
So, I could see that they were like, look, there's no way out of here unless we do a jump or a tuck, dive and roll. And I think you even said, if I were ever in
I
that-
would have threw myself
Yeah,
down
just
that hill,
threw
but
down the hill
you
and-
can't say that
Yeah.
when, you don't know.
but it's so difficult. But
yeah.
just when he finally made contact and said, guys, and they innocently were like, hi, even though they knew that they were in trouble, they still were trying to be like, oh, and yeah, that's tough. That's
Yeah, if
tough.
you've ever been in that situation where you're scared, but you're like, you want that tiny bit of hope that like maybe it's nothing,
No.
maybe it's still nothing. Before we wrap this up, the last day, Friday, was all about the bullet casing. So
Yes.
it was just an expert witness that they had who her job is to do this. And she was, in a nutshell, trying to verify that the markings that are on this casing that they found would be made by the weapon that Richard Allen owned. She says, yes, the defense is they are questioning how she did it, because I believe she testified that she had to actually fire it, but the bullet, but the bullet that they found was just a casing that was not fired. So I don't think she could get the markings to be made without the pressure of the bullet actually being fired through the chamber. So I took lots of notes on that, but
Ooh.
we can come back to that. If she said when she just racked it, it didn't leave any mark. She had to actually shoot it.
Oh, wow.
That's what she testified to. So see how there is, is the prosecution really coming out and proving 100%?
No.
Like what evidence do they have? They have him self-proclaiming I was there. They have eyewitnesses that descriptions don't match each other, let alone match Richard Allen, but they're still claiming Richard Allen's the bridge guy. What other evidence they have? They're saying the car. So that's why the cars, because they're going to say his car was there, he was there, and this bullet casing.
I think
so that's their evidence.
So I think, and we talked about this earlier, he put himself there, so we don't have to prove that. The defense has already proven that.
Yeah.
What the prosecution has to say is bridge guy Richard Allen.
Right.
Okay, that's where they need to make. We know he was in the park, but was there bridge guy who's some totally different person and Richard Allen way over here?
And right now
they're trying to say that it's the same guy. And you and I were talking about when they did that search, did they come out with a Kango hat? Because that is not,
I have not heard a hat.
a popular hat. So if they come out with a Kango hat that looks like that, not a, sock, there's not too many dudes out there who wear that style of hat.
Yeah.
So that's pretty unique. The Carhartt in Indiana, pretty common.
Pretty common.
Blue jeans in Indiana, probably pretty common, right?
Yeah.
That's blue collar,
Yeah.
workers out there. But the Kango hat seems a little unique.
Yeah.
For the
I
bridge
agree.
guy. So I would even ask his friends at CVS, his wife who can't testify against him unless they get divorced and she says, I want to. Did he ever own this type of hat? Because this is unique. I think, to me, this is a key point of the case that no one is talking about.
Yeah. I agree with you. I
Yeah.
think Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that gets brought up. But that's basically so far the evidence that they're trying to say. So
It's not a lot, but it's the little nuggets that they do have seem pretty
but there's
damning.
no DNA to your point. You like DNA.
I love DNA.
There's no DNA.
I love DNA.
So
But I love evidence that doesn't lie.
yeah.
And the digital evidence, right,
Yeah.
is this bridge guy. Right. And if that's, I haven't seen it all. Right.
So it'll be interesting. He said he left at 3:30. The girl's last phone 2:32. So yeah, I guess. Yeah, he's putting himself there. Yeah, he is putting himself there. So I don't know, a whole nother week. And this is the people who are going there to witness this hearing, I know, are completely exhausted. I'm having a hard time keeping up because you work all day and then you come home and we're trying to do family life stuff. And I'm like, I have to listen to 4 hours of the hearing today.
Yep.
So, but it's interesting and it's, a once in a lifetime huge case. So I really want to cover it. And
you
we'll
wish
carry
that
on.
you wish that they'd put these recordings out there so we could just listen to them at our leisure
Yes.
and make our own assessment, because we're listening to the interpretation of somebody who is interpreting things that are being said in the
Yes, I
courtroom.
wanted to bring that point up. Final thought, because I will listen to 3 or 4 different people who were there because it's just their, what they remember and the notes they captured. So sometimes I will hear a few different things based on who I listen to. So hope you enjoyed this episode.
Strand of
our recounting of this trial.
We're all over the place.
Yeah. We hope you'll join us back next time.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.